I've got a fun one planned for today. We'll be covering the world of frog fishing, talking about different types of frogs, brands, my personal experiences, some mods, gear needed, and of course, how to fish it. Well, stay tuned and find out on this episode of That Fishing Podcast.
This is Steve Rogers with Steve Rogers Outdoors, and you're listening to That Fishing Podcast. Sit back and enjoy.
Yo! Welcome back to the podcast. Or if you're new, welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, That Fishing Noob, and yes, we're going to be covering the world of frog fishing. So, real quick, funny behind the scenes. I was planning on having a different episode for today, but things kind of time got away from me. So we're going to be talking about this instead. The weather is warming up. It's going to be a good time to throw out these hollow body frogs. And guys, if you have not thrown out a frog and experienced a frog fish before, a topwater blow up with a frog, you're missing out. This is definitely one of the most addicting bites, most fun bites that you can get while fishing. There's nothing like going through and tossing a frog out in just the muck or around timber or like brush piles and then letting it sit, give it a couple twitches, couple pops, and then all of a sudden there's a big old bertha that comes up and inhales it. Wait a sec, set the hook. Oh my goodness, you're missing out if you're not throwing a frog, especially now. I don't know where you guys are at, but here in Texas, it is pretty warm now, so things are warming up. It is definitely the time to be throwing a frog. Frog fishing 101. We'll start with different types of frogs. So the main two that I'm going to be covering are popping frogs and your just like closed mouth, normal hollow body frogs. So this is not going to be covering any kind of like soft plastic like toads. It's just going to be hollow body frogs, and specifically ones that have the little silicone legs, not ones that have like a paddle tail leg or anything like that. Silicone legs. Main differences between just a regular hollow body frog and a popping frog is a popping frog, of course, has a little curve in its mouth, that concave face, so that way it can go bloop and pop. It's not as distinctive a bloop as a popper, but you can still get it to do it, and then also you can walk it. And then the other regular just hollow body frog is good for going through, and you can kind of chug water with it, but that's where that, side to side walk the dog action comes from. So there's different types of brands. There's like a Spro bronze-eyed frog coming in at about $11.99. There's a Berkley Swamp Lord, roughly $10.99. Some Booyah Pet Crashers, the cheapest probably of the bunch, coming in at $7.99. Some Live Target, about $10.99. And a couple others that I've messed with, like a 10K Fishing Tataki frog, and some other ones that are just out there. You can do your own research. You can go and watch videos, all the good stuff. Now, me personally, I've thrown 3 frogs primarily, and out of these 3, there's one that I like the most. So I've got experience fishing a Googan frog, a 10K Fishing, the Tataki frog, and Booyah frogs. And I found some other just random ones. I'm pretty sure I've thrown out a Berkley Swamp Lord a couple of times, but the ones that I enjoy fishing with are Booyah frogs. Now, both the Pet Crasher and just the good old popping frog. The Booyah is the cheapest out of the bunch, and I really enjoy throwing them. And I've, personally speaking, this is with the full size, not the Pet Crasher Juniors. With the full size, I've gotten actually pretty good durability out of them. Now with the Pet Crasher Juniors, those ones, I've had them tear on me after, maybe 5 fish or so, that's not fun because they're only like $1 cheaper. Now there's all of these different brands, and like I said, you can go through and do your own research and figure out what you like the best and what kind of tickles your fancy. For the most part, these frogs are going to be pretty similar. I think the biggest difference is going to be durability of them, and then also how hard that body is, how easy or difficult it is to compress that body whenever a fish goes through and eats or inhales your frog. It's up to you. If you find sales on different ones and you want to go experiment, then by all means go and do that. Fun thing about fishing, something that works for me might not work best for you. I'm fishing out of Texas, down here in Southeast Texas, so the frogs that I like throwing out might not work the same for you depending on where you are. So out of the box, these are some of the mods that I do for my hollow body frogs. So they have silicone legs and they're normally really long. The first thing that I do is normally trim my legs up. Normally after I trim the legs, and this is, you can experiment with this yourself, but I typically trim off a little bit over a quarter to half the length of that silicone leg initially out of the box. The reason for that is sometimes the bass want to go through and bite the legs, and if your legs are dangling back, like a body and a half behind the frog, you're going to get a lot of short strikes and they're going to miss the frog body. So then you're not going to get good hook sets because the hooks aren't in the fish's mouth. But after that, after I go through and trim my legs even, then I will pick either the left or the right side and trim an additional, let's maybe say an eighth of an inch, eighth to a quarter of an inch off. So that way it helps with the side to side walk the dog action on the frog. It just helps it go through and peel off to one side or the other after your initial twitch to get that head shake started. One thing that others do is sometimes they will bend out the hooks. Now, the quality of Booyah frogs isn't, like top tier, where all of the frogs are going to be perfect, but all of the frogs that I've ever fished with from Booyah, I've never had to bend out my hooks. There have been times when after fish, have bent my hooks out some, or kind of just misaligned the hooks, then I'll go through and readjust them a little bit. But normally when I go and buy a Booyah frog from the store, bring it home, I don't do anything except for trimming the legs and then offset trim. But just note that if for some reason, whatever frog you're throwing, if you're missing a lot of fish and you've gone through and trimmed the legs, then maybe you need to bend the hooks out just a hair. With that though, it is going to impact the weedlessness of the frog. So you can throw it into, thick vegetation still, but you have a slightly greater chance of going through and getting those hooks fouled up on vegetation compared to if those hooks are sitting flush against that frog's body. Another thing that you can do that I personally have not done because Booyah frogs are actually really, really soft is you can give your frog a hot bath. So this softens up their body, makes it easier to compress. So that way if a fish goes through and hails it, bites down on it, then there's less force needed to go through and push that body or compress that body to expose the hooks. Like I mentioned, with my Booyah frogs, I have not done a hot water bath for any of them. I've never had to do that. And I've had pretty decent hookups. We'll get down to kind of how to fish that a little bit later. One little quick thing. So frog colors. I personally don't think that you need to have all of the colors of the rainbow for these hollow body frogs. I think you need a light color and then a dark color. Because realistically, as good as the paint on the top of the frog is, the fish are not going to see it. And I don't know if you've heard it, but you'll hear it now. A lot of the times, colors of baits aren't for the fish. That's for the fishermen. It sells to the fishermen, the anglers. It's not to go through and hook up on more fish unless it's something that actually is underneath the surface of the water and fish can actually see. But for these frogs, like if it just has a white belly and it can have a hot pink top, it doesn't matter because the fish aren't going to see the hot pink top anyways. They're just going to see the white belly or the darker profile, like a black or a dark brown, dark gray belly. So don't be fooled. You don't need all of the colors. You don't need any of that. You just need something that is a lighter profile and then a darker profile. All right, moving on to gear that you need. So when I first started frog fishing, I fished with an Ugly Stik Elite and braided line. Backtrack. When I first started frog fishing, I don't recommend this. It was on a spinning reel and a spinning rod setup with, I think it was copolymer. It wasn't fluorocarbon because I didn't really throw it. I'm pretty sure it was copolymer. That's how I learned how to frog fish. That was way before I got into the world of bait casters. But the gear that I recommend for you to have is at least a medium heavy or a heavy rod. So that way, when you go through and you set into this fish, whenever you get a bite, you can go through and set into it with some authority and have some backbone to go through and be able to not only drive those hooks into the fish, but also wrestle them out of vegetation if need be. So at least a medium heavy or a heavy and then fast action would be good. Now that's what most of my rods are. I've heard of some going through and fishing with like an extra fast, but I just prefer fast. Now for reels, if you are learning how to frog fish with a bait caster, then you need a fast gear ratio, like a 7.0 gear ratio and up. If you're frog fishing with a spinning rod, because that's all you have, I mean, the spinning rod that I used was a Daiwa BG3000. The gear ratio on that, I think is, I want to say it's like 6.3, but it's probably not. I think it's 5.6 to 1. And I mean, that, it sufficed until I got into the world of bait casting. As long as I went through and good hook set and then kept it pinned and just burned it back. But as far as reel, bait casters, 7 or up gear ratio. So that way when you go through, set into it, you can just burn that frog back. You don't need to go through and play the fish. It's just set the hook, feel the fight, and then, go ahead and burn that fish back. Especially if you're having to pull them out of vegetation. Now, obviously, if you set into like a 10-pounder and you feel like, wow, I just set into a log, this is a stickfish, but then that stickfish starts fighting, then yeah, you should probably play that fish a little bit more than it's if you set into like a 2-pounder. And then last but not least, line. So braided line, I think, is a must whenever you're going through and throwing topwaters, especially hollow body frogs. Braided line is not going to have any stretch, so once you go through, get a bite, you feel that initial pressure and you go reel down on your slack, set into it, that is going to be like a direct transfer of force to that fish, which is going to go through and help drive those giant, massive hooks home and get good hook penetration and hopefully a good fish over to you either on the bank or on the boat. Another advantage is that braided line floats, so it's not going to sink down under the water like fluorocarbon, and it's also not going to have the stretch like monofilament. When I first started fishing with a bait caster and braided line, I fished with 30-pound, and now currently I throw 40-pound braid. Now I don't throw into really, really heavy stuff that's going to go and I think require heavier pound braid, but I know that others, their minimum is like 60-pound braid. So with you, I'd recommend maybe 50. That would be a good starting point of poundage of braid or line pounds of braid to throw out. But if you throw 30, like with me throwing initially in ponds and stuff, I didn't have any issue. Like I never broke off with 30-pound. Only time I broke off, funny random side little tangent, is when it was really cold, like below freezing, and there was ice on my guides, and then I made a cast and my line just snapped. But that's something different. And then the last thing is how to fish it, and then also where to fish it. So for some reason, bass and fish just love this walk the dog action on these things. And if you're not familiar with that, it is like if you can close your eyes and imagine you threw out a frog, just imagine the frog, no technique, nothing else. That frog is dancing and darting its head left, right, left, right, left, right, making kind of like sharp turns to one side and then like darting to the other side and then continuing that like in a cadence all the way back to wherever you are. That is walking the dog, that kind of action. And like I mentioned, for some reason the fish just absolutely love that kind of action. So real quick, getting into how to walk the dog, which is going to be kind of strange because there's no visuals here, right? But the biggest tips that I have and how I learned is once you get that initial head shake no, then you go through and apply another twitch. So what I want you to work on after you toss out your frog is just giving it a tiny little pop, tiny twitch, and watching for that head of the frog to dart either to the left or to the right. And then after that, you're going to go through and give it another pop. So with this, it's really important to have line out. It's not going to be a taut line. It's going to be a slack line. The trick is kind of figuring out the balance of how much slack line you need and how much of a twitch or a pop. So one thing that really helped me out when I was first learning how to walk a frog or walk the dog with a frog is less is more. So I was making these grand, like if my rod tip was pointed down at the water, I was moving my rod tip a good like 6 inches, and that was too much input for that frog. So now it's maybe like 2 to 3 inches, And like my cadence is I'll make a twitch like 2 to 3 inches, and then as I reset back to my start position of where my rod was, I'm reeling in just the tiniest bit of slack and doing that again. So I'm twitching like 2 to 3 inches of my rod tip down, and then returning back to my start position immediately, reeling in a tiny bit of slack. And then watching the frog too. So like if you're twitching too fast, you're not giving the frog enough time to go through and offset to one side or offset to the other side. It's a balance of going through and finding out how much slack you need and then how hard of a twitch that you need on your rod input, rod tip. But like I said, and the biggest thing is like it's getting down the muscle memory of getting that first initial twitch and then having that frog dart left or right and then giving it another twitch. And it's like it's the repetitive action of your rod tip is at one position, you twitch it 2 to 3 inches ish, and then return it right back to that position, that start position. And then you heard me say it earlier, but having your rod tip low to the water really helps go through and apply that input consistently down your line compared to like if your rod tip was straight up, because now your line is dangling in the air and whatever kind of, twitch or input you're applying kind of gets lost in the line because it's just dangling in the air. So once you've gone through, you can vary up your retrieves. So you can toss it out, you can go a twitch, 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 pause. Or you can go like a twitch, twitch, big twitch, pause. Or you can twitch, pause, twitch, pause, twitch, pause. There's different retrieves that you can go through and throughout depending on how the fish are, depending on the temperament of the fish, depending on the conditions. You kind of just have to respond how the fish are reacting. You respond to the feedback and the data that the fish are giving you. So if these fish are aggressive and they're blowing up on top, then by all means go through and keep a steady, twitch. If the fish are more finicky, maybe they're more reluctant to chase and be aggressive, then you can have those twitch, 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 pause, and those fish maybe on that pause will go through and hit it. It's about having different options, different tools in your brain to use to adjust to, the data, the conditions, the fish for that day. Because every day is going to be different. Some days I've gone through and I've been twitching and just twitching, and they hit it. Other days it's been like I really have to wait. So tossing it out, waiting like 5 seconds for the water to settle around it, and then doing like a twitch, and then waiting for another, 2 seconds, and then twitch, and then wait, and then they'll hit it. But the big thing too, and this kind of transfers over to getting bites on other presentations, you want to go through and try to find the cooperative fish. Because realistically, let's say if you're throwing at, a point where there's an overhang and some like brush right beneath it, there might not be a fish there. There could be, but there might not be. So if you make 100,000 casts at that one spot, you might be able to find a fish later as one is going to that spot or just cruising and it's like, oh, look at this. Or you might not find a fish. So once you find those areas that you find like, all right, there should be a fish here, go through, keep it in the strike zone, which is around that area where that fish should be holding tight to cover or holding tight to whatever it is you're targeting. And then after the strike zone, go ahead and just retrieve in and make another accurate cast. So let's say you've gone through, you're out, you're fishing either from the bank or from kayak or a boat. You've made some good accurate casts, you made some really nice twitches, some real invigorating head shakes and walking the dog, and it's nice, and then you finally get a blow up. If it's your first blow up, you have to pump the brakes and don't immediately set the hook. You've got to wait a sec for that frog to get in position in that fish's mouth, and then you go through and with authority set into it. You got to go through and it's going to feel like a while until you get used to it. So let's say you're twitching, bite. It's literally like 1,001 and then set the hook. And once you do, like you set the hook and you keep that pressure and you just start burning it, start retrieving. And then fight is on and bada bing, bada boom, frogfish. But that's one of the things that I had to do is really wait. So there's been times when, a frog has gone through or a fish has gone through and inhaled my frog, but it's only been the leg. So it sucks it down underneath the water, but then like a second later, it just pops back up. The biggest thing that you want is you want to give that frog enough time to go through and position into the fish's mouth. So that way you're not yanking the frog out of the fish's mouth without those hooks being somewhere in position to go through and grab hold of something. Wait a sec when you get a bite. When you get a blow up, 1,001, set into it. Or you can wait like 1,001 and a half, or like 1 Mississippi, and then set into it. Don't just go through and bite set. You're going to miss fish that way. And then a fun last thing to do, and this is kind of common sense, but I also kind of find it funny. Give your frog a pee break. Your frog is going to need a bathroom break every once in a while, especially as it gets worn and it starts taking on water. You got to go through and just give it a couple pumps and give it a potty break. Now that's unless you're trying to have your frog not be as buoyant and kind of sink down underneath the water, unless you're applying some kind of input. But if you want that frog to stay buoyant, give your frog a potty break. Your frog will work so much better for you. And like I said, if you're trying to keep it above the water, it'll catch you that many more fish. Now real quick, with a popping frog, you can also walk the dog with a popping frog. So I have a pretty decent amount of popping frogs because if these fish are more finicky and I'm trying to draw them out of cover, then I want to go through and use my popper frog to go through and make that little bloop and then make it sound like something's munching up here and draw those fish out. That's also whenever I'm having to slow down in fish, if these fish aren't hyper aggressive and they're willing to go through and just chase things from far away and completely demolish them. But the fun thing with a popping frog is, similarly to just a normal hollow body frog, you can walk it the same way, which is nice. So it can go through, you can give it a really hard pop and it can chuck water, spit water, half a foot, couple inches, 6 inches. Or you can go through and really give it a snappy pop to make it have more of a popper sound, or you can walk it. So I like the versatility of popping frogs. I think those are fun. Last thing, where to throw your frog. The good thing about a frog is you can throw it almost anywhere. It's don't throw it into a tree. There's no fish there. I've lost frogs to tree soups. But you can throw it in really thick vegetation. You can throw it on top of mats. You can throw it around brush piles. You can throw it around rocks. You can throw it over next to a lay down. You can throw it next to walls. You can skip it under a dock. You can throw it pretty much all over the place like that. And because it's weedless, especially throwing it into a mat or throwing it into vegetation, it's just going to go through and disturb the water and act like a little something's alive above the surface and maybe struggling to find land. And then a fish is ooh, that's an easy meal, so let me go blow up on it and eat it. Frogs can be thrown all over the place without any kind of worry of going through and getting fouled up with a ton of vegetation, unless you bend your hooks out like crazy. The favorite place for me to throw a frog is around vegetation, and typically whenever I am throwing out into vegetation, I like to do what I call a sneaky approach, which is where I will throw it onto the bank, and this is either from, if I'm bank fishing or fishing from the kayak, but I'll cast out onto the bank and I will slide that frog into the water very nonchalantly and very sneaky like. And then from there, I'll give it a little pause, and then I'll start my, my cadence twitch. And then normally that's how I've gotten a ton of bites on a frog. But outside of that, I like throwing it around brush piles. I like throwing it around cover that I can see. I like throwing it around vertical cover. But I think my favorite place to throw it is probably more up shallow and then in vegetation, or if there's a big brush pile, throwing it around that. That's where a lot of my bites have come from. Other places too would be an overhang. If there are branches, especially as spring is underway, so everything is filling back out, there's going to be a ton of shade, a ton of leaves, a ton of this thickness for these bass to go through and feel it's not a clear blue sky above me. I feel pretty protected right here. So those are some fun spots to go through and target as well. And then earlier I mentioned going through and sticking in the target zone. There are times that I've gone through and drawn a fish out closer to me. However, I feel like overall in a fishing trip, if I were to go through and retrieve back my frog all the way back to me for every single cast, that would be time not invested, as well as if I just stuck within that little target zone, and then if there was no fish that hit it, retrieve back and make another cast into another section of that target zone, or just another hot area that I think would be holding a fish. So that's not to say that you can't go through and walk your frog all the way back to wherever you are. Fun thing about fishing, right? You go through and experiment, and I don't know, maybe your first fish will be like in the middle of a pond after you've walked it back for like a minute. I don't know, but trial and error. I'm not saying that my way is the best way. It's not. Go out there, experiment, see, just respond back to the fish, respond back to your fishing conditions and kind of what your environment is telling you for that day. Now is definitely the time, now through summer, and depending on how cold it gets and how fast it gets for you, fall, this is the time to go and throw out a hollow body frog. I'm telling you, if you have not experienced the rush of setting into a fish that just blew up on your frog, you're missing out. But I hope these little tips help you out and get you into the game of frog fishing. So all in all, frog fishing, we have different types of frogs. The two main ones that I highlighted are popping frogs and just your normal hollow body frogs. There are a lot of different brands out there. But the biggest thing is find one that you like, one that you're willing to go through and spend your money on, and then stick with it. And then if you find sales, you can go and experiment with other brands to see, oh, well, I actually like this brand too. Out of the box with my Booyahs that I normally fish with, the only mod that I do with them is I trim the legs and then offset trim the legs. So one leg, either the left or the right, is shorter than the other one. That helps it get that initial head shake. Know that little offset glide to left side or the right side. And it helps start that process of walking a dog that much better, or that much easier. As far as gear, stick with at least a medium heavy fast or a heavy. You can go with whatever brand that you are comfortable with. I started off with an Ugly Stick Elite. Now my topwater frog is a Kistler Chromium. Lengthwise, I didn't mention this earlier, but I mean 7 foot is like the do-all. It's comfortable for me. But like a 6'6", if you're on a kayak, 7 foot is pretty comfortable generally for those that primarily bank fish. But whatever's comfortable for you. All of my rods are at least 7 foot and up, and I primarily fish out of a kayak. As far as a reel, the higher gear ratios are going to be what you go after. So with a bait casting reel, a 7.0 gear ratio and up. If for some reason you're frog fishing with a spinning reel, then try to get something that's pretty fast. Your fishing line, braided line, and I think a good base, a good minimum would be like 50 pounds. How to fish it and where to fish it. Normally for just your traditional hollow body frog, it's going through and doing a walk the dog motion, which is that side to side action of a retrieve. Now you can vary that retrieve up with a side to side action for, 4 twitches and then give it a pause. And then maybe 3 twitches, give it a pause. And then if you're throwing out a concave face, a hollow body frog, then you can go through and fish it like a popper, similar to a popper, giving it that little bloop. And then if not, then you can go through and make it spit water, chug water, and, like spit water a good 4-6 inches in front of it and give it a pause. Or, something about those hollow body little popper frogs is you can fish it like a normal traditional hollow body frog too. You can walk it. The best thing about a frog is that it is a weedless lure. It is a weedless presentation. So you can throw it all over the place, just not into trees because that's not good. But you can throw it into thick vegetation, you can throw it into mats, you can throw it close to brush piles, so don't be afraid to throw it into some thicker stuff, especially if you haven't bent your hooks out. Once you get a bite, wait. Count to like 1.5 before you go through and set the hook, so that way you're not ripping that frog out of the fish's mouth. And then, last fun thing, make sure to give your frog a potty break, so your frog can stay buoyant and go through and be happy and work for you, hopefully catching more fish. But thank you for joining me on this episode. Like I said, short and sweet. I appreciate you guys that come through and listen. This podcast has still been fun, and hey, stay tuned because I've got some interviews coming up that I'm planning that I think are going to be really enjoyable as well. But you guys go through, leave some comments down below. Make sure to go through and rate the show. It helps go through and suggest my podcast more, which I would greatly appreciate. I think that'd be cool. But thank you for spending your time with me. I appreciate it. I'm still learning, and I'm hoping that, the things that I'm putting out into the podcast are little tips that help you to hopefully catch more fish and be a better angler. But that'll be it for this one. I hope that you guys are able to go fishing, and if you are fishing, I hope you're able to catch a big one. But I'll catch you on the next one. Tight lines. God bless.